Hi, everyone. How are you doing? I'm Dr. Wendy Myers. Welcome to the Myers Detox podcast. And we have a great show for you today. We have Max Casa on the show, and he's going to be talking about float tanks, sensory deprivation, and detoxing with magnesium. And so, really interesting shows. I love float tanks. I tried one. I don't know why it took me so long to get around to doing them because I've heard about them for so long. But last time I was in LA, I went to one. I was kind of stressed out and dealing with a bunch of stuff. And I went to one and it was so transformative. It just helped me so much. I got addicted to them. I was in LA about a month and I was doing them almost every day when I was there because I just felt so good when I was doing them. So I wanted to do this show on float tanks and all the many benefits of them. And we talk about the kind of magnesium that's used in float tanks and what you want to use instead. We talk about different types of magnesium. We talk about, what a float tank session looks like. What do you do? How do you, when you get in them and get out of them? And we talk about the differences between different float tanks. And Dr. Mercola uses float tanks. So really interesting show today. So I know you guys listening to this show are interested in detox and what perhaps your body burden of toxins are. So I created a quiz called the Heavy Metals Quiz. You can check that out at heavymetalsquiz.com. It's just a 2-minute quiz, answers or asks you some lifestyle questions to deduce your relative body burden of toxins. And after you get your quiz results, you get a free video series that answers a lot of your frequently asked questions about detoxification, where to start, how long it takes, et cetera, et cetera. So check that out at heavymetalsquiz.com. So our guest today, Max Casa, he's the alchemically alive sensei. That's hard to say. And he's an accomplished lifelong martial artist, a performance coach, and medicine man. So before becoming the founder of Max Vitality, Max trained day and night for over a decade, aiming to become the next top UFC featherweight prospect. So his drive to become the best led him down the rabbit hole of biohacking and all-around performance optimization. And so after countless health obstacles, Max dedicated himself to finding the easiest and most effective recovery therapy. So Max discovered float therapy, also known as sensory deprivation, hoping it would aid in his physical recovery. And so he soon realized that simply lying suspended in a silent, dark, saltwater-filled tank not only healed his body, but simultaneously enhanced his mind and deepened his connection with spirit. So now Max aims to spread his knowledge on the benefits of floating, magnesium, minerals, and energy in hopes to help others strengthen and balance their mind, body, and spirit. You can learn more about Max and his work at maxvitality.co. So Max, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on, Wendy.
Yeah, so why don't you tell us about yourself and how you got into the health industry?
So I originally got into it at a super young age. I've been a lifelong martial artist since the age of 4. Unfortunately, my parents just got me into it super early on, and I was diagnosed with a degenerative neuromuscular disease at birth called Charcot-Marie-Tooth, or CMT. And originally, they were hoping that getting me involved in something like the martial arts would help with my muscle strength and my balance and coordination. So really, it was either martial arts or ballet. And nothing against ballet, but thankfully it was martial arts because it's become such a huge part of my life these past 20 years now. But really, as I got older and started teaching and competing more, I was just constantly looking for ways to optimize my mind and body and kind of get that leg up. So I started exploring different therapies, whether it was cryotherapy or yoga or meditation. And then ultimately, one day I ended up stumbling upon float therapy, and it totally changed my life. I went into Float Boston. There's a float center in Boston. And at the time, it was the only float center in all of New England. We're going back about 8 years ago now. And I remember, Wendy, when I got out of the tank, I was literally buzzing with this sensation of relaxation and pure inner peace that I had never experienced my entire life. Never mind, at the time, I was in the middle of a fight camp, which is one of the most stressful things going on in my life at the time. So ultimately, I ended up floating more, reaping more of its incredible benefits, and delving deeper into the research on floating, and then ultimately ended up being inspired to start a business where we manufacture, customize, and install float therapy chambers all over the globe.
So awesome. So I love float therapy. It's something that I've done before. And, I don't think there's one here in Mexico. I haven't looked into it, but there might be. There's a lot of alternative, therapies here and whatnot. But for anyone who doesn't know about it, what is float therapy exactly?
Yes, we'll have to change it up. We'll have to get some tanks down in Mexico
Yeah.
for you. But ultimately, if anyone isn't familiar, floating or sensory deprivation is a powerful healing tool that's totally taken, especially the West Coast in Europe, by storm the past couple decades. But ultimately, what it involves is getting in a big egg-shaped hot tub type tank with a lid over the top, oftentimes about the size of a small car. And inside this chamber is the most unique environment on the face of planet Earth, because not only there's 10 inches of water inside the tank, but those 10 inches of water are super saturated with over 1,000 pounds of therapeutic grade Epsom salt. And the benefits of Epsom salt alone have been well known and well documented for hundreds, even thousands of years. But ultimately, this creates a super saturated, incredibly buoyant saltwater solution, so dense that I could literally take a bowling ball, put it in the water, and it would easily float to the top. So ultimately, the solution enables effortless floating. But it's not just the 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt that make the chamber environment so unique. It's also that inside that tank, it's totally void of all sensory inputs altogether, meaning that in a properly calibrated flotation environment, not even a single photon of light is entering the user's experience at all. There's no sound inside the chamber, because not only is the tank itself sound resistant, but the user is also wearing earplugs. There's no sense of smell, no sense of taste, and there's not even a sensation of touch inside the chamber, because the saltwater solution and the air inside the tank is precisely heated and kept at a constant 94.5 degrees Fahrenheit. And what's so magical about 94.5 is actually the same exact temperature as the external layer of your skin. And oftentimes what this translates to is a saltwater solution in the air is actually skin receptor neutral, meaning that the user's brain usually loses sensation within the first 30 minutes or so of entering the tank of where their body ends and where the water begins. And this can lead to profound spiritual, often life-changing experiences. But ultimately, floating is easy as getting inside the tank, closing the lid, flicking off the light, laying back and floating.
Nice. Yeah, I had kind of an out-of-body experience because I do meditation, and I went in the float tank and really had kind of this sense like I was one with the universe. Like I had this like samadhi experience that I'd never really experienced that before. And it was because of these, I don't want to say extreme, but these ideal kind of conditions that you experience while on the float tank.
Totally. Yeah. And it's really almost a cheat to meditation in a way, because it's cutting out all that external stimulation for you. You don't have to worry about the dog barking or the birds chirping or someone coming in to the room. You're sitting in there and it's cutting all of that external stimulation out for you. Again, We're talking about all of the senses. And a lot of people don't talk about this. We hear people all the time talking about all these stressors that are coming in from our diet, our lifestyle, EMFs, and pollutants of all kinds. But so rarely does anyone talk about one of the largest stressors to our entire nervous system. Yes. And that's the fact that we're constantly being bombarded with over 10 million bits of sensory stimulation every single second of the day. And this is one of the largest stressors to our entire nervous system. And when we really give ourselves the opportunity to disconnect and unplug from all the external stimulation, we feel better as a result.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really, truly is profound. I mean, it's just, there's nothing like it. So for me, I wish I hadn't waited so long to try a float tank. I mean, I lived in Los Angeles a long time and they were around for years and I'd heard about them. And I just never went to try one. But I just had moved to Mexico, went to LA, and I was kind of stressed out. And I thought, I want to try one. And I got so addicted. I went to one session and I went almost every day. I was in LA for a month. I went almost every single day. I had to have my float at the end of my day. It was just it just brought me so much peace. It made me feel so good. And I slept so much better. I really love floating.
I love to hear that. Yeah, that's eerily similar to how I feel all the time.
Yeah.
Gotta get my daily floated.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
necessary.
And so what are the benefits? Obviously, there's a lot of benefits to doing this, but what are the main benefits of floating specifically?
I'm glad you asked. And ultimately, the way I like to break it down is there's three main pillars of benefits that we find that are resulting in the profound uh, effects that we're seeing in all the clinical research done on it. And ultimately, the first one is all of the benefits we're getting from escaping the forces of gravity. Because a lot of people don't recognize this is another extreme stressor to our nervous system. And those two stressors alone, the combination of having to battle the forces of gravity and having to process external overstimulation, utilize over 80% of our nervous system's energy every single day. So if we're not focusing on the 80%, we're kind of taking a roundabout way to optimizing our health, in my opinion. But when we enter a true zero gravity environment, it's totally unlike laying on a mattress at the end of the night where there's thousands of springs and pain points. Because when we enter a true zero gravity environment, what we see is that our blood vasculature can totally relax and our capillaries can totally vasodilate. So as a result, we see a huge surge in blood flow, oxygen flow, and microcirculation to every part of the body, which is incredibly healing for thousands of ailments. But on top of that, the second main aspect is all the benefits of the sensory deprivation. And ultimately, when our brain power isn't being put towards processing the external world, we have so much more brain power and consciousness put towards whatever we really have to do. And oftentimes that's relax, it's recover, it's detox, it's reset better than ever before. And thirdly, the benefits of the magnesium that's being absorbed transdermally through the hair follicles of your skin during the entirety of every single float session. And this is incredibly important. I've heard you talk about it extensively, but magnesium is the fourth most abundant mineral in the human body, and well over 95% of Americans are extremely magnesium deficient. So again, we're talking about a mineral that's responsible for over 3,700 enzymatic reactions, but we only have 9,000 enzymes in the body. So this equates to over 42% of our electrical body being totally run and dependent on this magical mineral. And that's a big deal. And when we take into consideration that it's extremely difficult to get even a fraction of enough magnesium from our food, even if we're focused on eating so-called magnesium-rich foods, the idea that we're getting enough is a fallacy, because our soils where our plants would actually be getting the magnesium are incredibly depleted. It's due to factory farming, it's due to acid rain, and it's due to the fact that magnesium is just rapidly burned to combat stresses of all kinds, including heavy metals, including EMFs. We can go down the line. But ultimately, when I talked to Dr. Mercola, he's crystal clear. He wasn't able to really move the dial on his red blood cell magnesium levels, which is the most accurate magnesium blood test that we have to date, until he started introducing transdermal forms via the float tank at his house. So ultimately, there's many benefits to floating, but to sum it up, the benefits of the zero gravity environment, the benefits of the sensory deprivation, and the benefits of magnesium being absorbed directly into your bloodstream, where it can be used right away.
And is there a specific form of the magnesium flakes that you use in the float tanks versus like Epsom salts or what have you?
So typically, when I got into the industry, and still to date, nearly 100% of the float tanks that we find on the market are filled with Epsom salt. But really, as I started going down the rabbit hole of how could I optimize the float tank itself, we took all the steps. We totally EMF shielded our float tanks. We have powerful underwater sound transducers that emit the frequencies into the saltwater solution and into every cell of the user's body. But ultimately, my mind went directly to how could I optimize the float tank solution itself. That's where things really started to get interesting, because what I learned pretty early on is that magnesium, everyone's filling their float tanks with 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt, but magnesium chloride has over 230% more magnesium by volume than Epsom salt. So for anyone at home, just simply making that switch to tossing the Epsom salt, going for the magnesium chloride is a great way to really start moving the dial on our magnesium levels in the body. But then we really started going down the rabbit hole of how could I possibly maximize how much magnesium is actually getting into the body during a float session. And that's when we started exploring stacking that with different cofactors and blending that into the float solution as well. And we know now that there's two powerful magnesium cofactors that can actually be absorbed transdermally as well. And one of them is potassium bicarbonate. And what this does when it's mixed with the magnesium chloride in the float tank or in a bath is it actually helps get more magnesium into the cells and, more importantly, into the mitochondria. And this is very important because then our body can use the magnesium to create things like ATP, or our body's form of energy. On top of the potassium bicarbonate, we also started mixing in boron into the float solution as well, which is another cofactor magnesium I'm sure you're familiar with. And boron's fascinating because when it's stacked with magnesium, it helps keep the magnesium in the cells longer as well. And it does this by like slowing the metabolism of things that deplete our magnesium levels even more, like calcium. But ultimately, the purest magnesium chloride blended with potassium bicarbonate and boron to get more magnesium into the mitochondria and keep it in the cells longer. And we even started blending in different enzymes that totally neutralize any harmful chemicals in the water itself, like chlorine and fluoride. So we ended up making this blend and filling all of our float tanks in it. And even when seasoned floaters would come in, they would just be raving about the benefits and the difference of what they've experienced from bathing in Epsom salt. And what they were saying is huge decreases in levels of state anxiety, of stress, and anecdotally, when they would go to test their red blood cell magnesium levels, they were seeing large increases in that as well.
That's great. That's amazing. That's not easy to raise either. I mean, a lot of people attempt to do that with supplements and things like that. It just doesn't work so great.
Totally. We see a lot of people are always asking what's the best magnesium supplement, but a lot of the research on oral magnesium supplementation, it shows increases in urinary levels of magnesium, shows increases in the serum levels of magnesium. But when we look at how long it's taking oral supplementation to really move the dial on our red blood cell magnesium levels, oftentimes it's taking well over 9 to 12 months to move the dial at all. It's because it's low bioavailability and the fact that it's burned so rapidly. So when we have an option now, and we know that we can get magnesium directly into the bloodstream where it can be utilized right away by the body. And there's no wait time. We don't have to wait a year to begin to do this and start to reap the benefits of it. And the answer is transdermal magnesium.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, you can't really compare how relaxed you feel after you do a float tank. And certainly it's many reasons, but it's the magnesium as well. Obviously that you're relaxed, your muscles are relaxed, your nervous system is relaxed, you sleep better. You just feel so much better when you're getting that huge magnesium push in your body.
Totally. It's been my experience and the experience of many people as well. And yeah, it's not just anecdotal. We now know, we've captured in the laboratory magnesium ions literally passing through the skin into the bloodstream right away during a float session. And the way it's doing it, just to get into a little deeper, is it's passing through the hair follicles of the skin, which is super fascinating. But again, we only see this when we're bathing in a solution that is extremely concentrated. We're not talking about a couple pounds of Epsom salt in a foot soak at the end of the night. We're talking about 1,000 pounds of magnesium salts in just 10 inches of water. So we see it passing through the hair follicles when we're in a solution that is extremely concentrated, that is over 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're in that solution for at least 30 minutes. And that's really the key there. So it's not just popping our feet in or taking a dip in the ocean. We have to go a little bit deeper than that.
Yeah. And is that working by osmosis where the concentration is really high in the water, so it gets pushed into the less concentrated tissues, in your body through your skin?
Totally. It mixed with the fact that our body actually has a natural fail-safe mechanism through the skin, which is another reason that I highly prefer transdermal forms of magnesium, is because we don't have to worry about kind of just flooding our system with magnesium and having no clue if it's going to stick. Our body's super intelligent, as you know, and we're in a solution like that. Our body will actually open up our pores and our hair follicles to allow more magnesium into the bloodstream so it can be utilized. And then what we see is when our body's kind of had enough and our magnesium status for the day is kind of topped off, it will actually close off those mechanisms and stop allowing more magnesium in, which is super interesting. And so I'm a huge advocate of leveraging that natural fail-safe mechanism through the skin.
And so you have your own brand of magnesium that you sell, correct, for putting in the float tanks and putting in people's baths if they wish?
Totally. And that's how it started. It started by looking to optimize the float solution. But then what we realized is maybe not everyone has access or is in the spot currently to be able to implement or bring a float tank into their apartment living room or something like that. Maybe they don't have access to a float center nearby. So we just wanted to lower that barrier to entry and also allow people to reap one of the most powerful benefits of floating, the transdermal magnesium. So we ended up taking that powerful bath blend that we're filling our float tanks with, bagging it up, and then putting an affordable price tag on it. And now we sell that out. And what we see people do is either in between their float sessions to revitalize in between, or just to top off their magnesium levels at the end of a hard day, even just 2 tablespoons of this stuff with all the cofactors, super powerful blend. It doesn't take pounds and pounds or bags of this stuff in a bath. It literally just takes 2 tablespoons, whether it's in a foot soak at the end of the night or a full body bath. People are reaping incredible benefits.
That's great. Yeah. And so what is your website again where people can get that?
So it's www.maxvitality.co.co.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, but my favorite way to do it at the end of the night is I have a little foot soak. I'm actually in the process. So I'm down here on a self-sustaining farm in Hawaii. And I've been kind of shuffling scavenger around on the beaches. I'm looking for pieces of flat lava rock. And me and my 6-year-old daughter are on a project of building our own foot soak out of lava rock down here on the island. Because foot soak's my favorite way to really do that, because the pores are the largest on the bottom of our feet. So it really takes a really small amount of magnesium. You can get a really dense solution. You just put your feet in. So after this podcast, I'll throw my feet in just 20 or 30 minutes in there. Feet in there. Not only is there the largest pores in the body, but also the nerve endings to every major organ in the body as well, at the bottom of the feet. So we sit in there 30 minutes or so a night, especially as a martial artist, being up on my feet a lot. It's a great way to not just get more magnesium into the system, but also relax and mix in a little bit of self-care.
Nice. Yeah, you don't seem relaxed at all.
I'm glad it's showing.
Yeah. And so how often should people float? How often should they get in the float tank?
So ultimately, it just goes back to what they're looking to get out of the experience. Maybe if someone's dealing with a more traumatic condition, whether it's concussion, whether it's a broken ankle or a hurt back, I always recommend floating as many times as they possibly can within the first week or two, really just to zap that inflammation at its core and accelerate the healing. But with that being said, if someone's goals are more related to reducing levels of state anxiety, stress levels, or even just sleeping better, we now know that the short-term anxiety effects of floating have been shown to last anywhere from 24 to 36 hours after a single float session. So using that data, floating anywhere from a couple times a week to a couple times a month can be extremely effective for all that.
So there's nothing going on in this tank. There's no water, there's no light, there's no sound, there's no, sensory inputs. So what do you do in the tank? Like, what does a session look like when you get in and get out of the float tank?
Depends who you're asking. Some people go in there and splash around. No, just kidding. But usually I go in there and it brings up this interesting concept of passive floats, where people just will go into the float tank and set their intention to surrender to the silent darkness, which is a beautiful thing to do, because those are 2 of the most powerful medicines on the face of planet Earth, the silent darkness. And when you go in there, it's incredibly healing. Well, like we say, when we give our bodies, our brains, our nervous systems the opportunity to disconnect from all the world's external stimulation, and you give it a respite from having to battle the force of gravity, we realize that our body has a natural and innate ability to heal itself. And that's what we see inside the tank. So silent darkness is a great way to do that. But we also see, on the other hand, is this whole emerging field in the float industry of active floats. And maybe you're not just going into the silent darkness with the intention to surrender. Maybe you're now leveraging those powerful underwater sound transducers on the back of the tank. And now there's an aux cord that comes out of the back of the tank. You can simply just plug your phone into. And what we see is sometimes clients are going in there and blasting powerful frequencies during their float session. Maybe if someone's resistant to getting ready to the silent darkness, they can flick on the multicolor chromotherapy light on the top of the tank, maybe get the benefits of red light therapy while they're also escaping the force of gravity and soaking up magnesium through the skin. But whether it's powerful frequencies, whether it's guided meditations during your session, there's also been some fascinating studies. My fiance is a hypnotist, really high level. And there's been a lot of fascinating studies showing that hypnosis, when done in sensory deprivation, is over 5 times more effective. Just fascinating. It's ultimately because now, without all the external distractions, your subconscious can really focus all of its awareness on the sublingual messages that are coming in. On top of this, even one last one is the fact that our SEALs, or our Navy SEALs, have been leveraging sensory deprivation floating as an accelerated learning environment. And what they found is they're going into the tank now and maybe kind of hooked on phonics style.
Teaching them Russian.
Yeah, exactly. All of it. So they're in the tank and they're listening to these languages. And what they were seeing before it was taking over 6 months to teach these SEALs a language. Now they've been able to speed learn it with the help of sensory deprivation in just 6 weeks. So that's literally almost 1/5 of the time, which is fascinating. So there's so many emerging fields here and ways to go about it. I'm a fan of the silent darkness myself, but depending on what you're looking to get out of the float, there's many different ways we can go about this.
Well, I'm just going to find a float place because I'm trying to learn Spanish because I live in Mexico. So thanks for that idea.
Yeah, no doubt. That's awesome.
And so what would you recommend, like for someone that's trying to do a detox? There are, obviously people listening to this show are trying to detox their body. How does float facilitate detoxification?
Totally. Yeah, it's absolutely one of the best ways, I'd say, in my opinion. One, when we look at the fact, like we talked about, not only is the zero gravity environment creating this relaxation, the blood vasculature, and this vasodilation effect of our capillaries, which is allowing a surge in blood flow and microcirculation to different parts of the body. It's incredibly powerful for detoxing. But at the same time, magnesium sulfate's known to be incredibly detoxing. We hear people talk about it when they're referring to maybe loose stools after an Epsom salt bath or anything like that. It's almost notorious for this. People always ask, how do I stop the loose stools or something after a float? And I would say, why would you want to? Because this is your body's way of detoxing all of these heavy metals and all of these toxins that have been stuck in the body and in the intestines for who knows how long. And it's finally the magnesium mixed with the sulfates being absorbed through the skin is allowing our body to complete its natural process, which is detoxing. But on top of this, like we talked about, the transdermal magnesium that's being absorbed, magnesium binds to many of the same receptor sites as many of these heavy metals, like whether it's lead, aluminum, or mercury, just to name a few. It's binding to the same receptors. So oftentimes it can displace them, chelate them through the phase 1 detox pathway. But if our magnesium levels are proficient and our receptors are already full with what they prefer, which is magnesium, having to worry about the harmful effects of some of these heavy metals kind of becomes secondhand. So we can really get the magnesium into the receptor sites, bump up our red blood cell magnesium levels. We have to worry about that a little bit less. So I feel that's one of the first things we should be doing here.
Yeah, I mean, I think your body works so much better when you just fix the magnesium deficiency. I mean, I don't think people realize how many systems it impact. I mean, every system to a degree in the body when you don't have enough cellular magnesium. And so this is such a great way to increase that. And so do you have a float tank center in Hawaii where people can go to?
The float tank actually didn't make the move with me yet. So I moved down here a few months ago. I've been using one for almost the past decade now. It's acted almost as my bed. So it's been quite the transition, but it'll be coming soon. We don't currently have a center, but what we do is we own a company where we manufacture, customize, and install the float therapy chambers themselves.
Okay, great.
So we install those in residential homes and businesses all across the globe. And then we introduced our alchemically alive magnesium bath blend that we had talked about a little bit earlier, which again has the purest magnesium chloride on earth. has far more magnesium than Epsom salt, with powerful cofactors like potassium bicarbonate and boron to get more magnesium into the mitochondria and keep the magnesium in the cells longer, along with different enzymes that actually neutralize and off-gas any harmful chemicals in the bathwater itself. The salt's actually totally blasted with infoceutical frequencies. I'm not sure if you're familiar with infoceuticals at all, but it's blasted with magnesium frequencies. It's blasted with heart opening frequencies, with grounding frequencies. And on top of this, the salt itself is actually alchemically alive, meaning that the life force energy of the salt is incredibly higher than any of the other salts that we'll find on the shelf. So even again, like I said, just a couple tablespoons of this stuff in a foot soak or a full body bath at the end of the night is a great way to top off our mineral levels and help detox more effectively and raise the vibe of our entire life.
Yeah. And so if someone wants to get a float tank, they can contact you on maxvitality.co. I think want to get a customized float tank in their home, which you would not regret that. Definitely not at all. Because I don't think I've ever done any kind of like spa treatment or any other kind of, or like Korean spas that I've gone to. I haven't done any session that's as pleasurable or as maybe beneficial as doing a float tank. I mean, that you really feel unbelievable after you do a float.
I agree. And like I said, I've explored, and much like yourself, I've explored many of the powerful healing tools on earth. And floating was absolutely, if not the most powerful tool I'd ever experienced, one of them for sure. That's why I ended up investing so much time into the research on floating. So
you mentioned you have work with Dr. Mercola for his tank. Any other kind of health gurus that you've installed tanks for?
We've been installing tanks in the homes of so many of the world's top biohackers and athletes. So it's been such a pleasure working with them, and that's kind of why leveraging their great minds with my decent mind to really put all this awareness and energy on not just how to optimize the float tank itself, like we talked about, all of the additions we put on, EMF shielding the tank, making sure the pump in the tank is releasing no EMF at all, to keep those calcium channels pristine, but also leveraging these minds and putting it into how can we optimize the float tank solution itself. And what that ended up coming down to is Vitality Salts, the bag that we've created, and filling all of our float tanks with that powerful blend of the salt and all the cofactors to maximize magnesium absorption and maximize the benefits of floating.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. So everyone check out floats, there's a lot of different float tanks around the country, but I think for anyone really serious about their health, I think getting one in their home is just an amazing idea. And if you can't afford a float, second best is getting your salts, your magnesium salts. So is there any kind of closing thoughts that you have or anything maybe we haven't talked about?
I feel we delved in deeply on various topics, but one last one, a large piece of my philosophy is that, because people are always asking, how can I heal from X, Y, and Z condition? And it's important that when we're talking about any disease, at the root of that disease, what we find is an energy deficiency in the tissue. And oftentimes this energy deficiency is a result of, because our body uses minerals to create ATP energy in the body, is oftentimes a result of a magnesium and sometimes even a copper deficiency at the root core. So what we see is that we can really start moving the dial on our red blood cell magnesium levels. Our body can more effectively make things like ATP, create more energy, and now it has more energy to really go into these tissues and really start to heal on a deeper level. So ultimately, just putting a little bit more awareness, all of us, even if we can't go out to a float center nearby or invest in a float tank right now, that's totally cool. But really just taking the message of, we are the guinea pig generation. There's so much external stimulation that we're constantly being bombarded with by all of our senses every second of the day. So even if I can't take some time to go out into a float tank, whether it's taking some time in meditation, whether it's putting the screens down, putting the phones down, getting away from the screens and just going on a walk in nature. It's also a great way to disconnect from the outside world and reconnect with your inner being inside. So making sure we're taking some strides, doesn't have to be floating, take some strides to connect with your inner being on a different level, and also up those magnesium levels. And the best way to do it is transdermally. So if anyone's interested, we got that Vitality Salts blend on our site. Feel free to check us out, message me on there. You can also find me at Max Casa, MAXXCASA at Instagram. And I'm looking forward to connecting with more of you guys then.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Max, thanks so much for coming on the show. I'm really glad that you reached out to me to talk about this because I love floats, highly recommend them. I need to figure out a place to go do them now that you reminded me. But yeah, there's just so pleasurable and so healthy for you, and a great way to reduce stress, which so many people are dealing with these days. So everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm Dr. Wendy Myers of MyersDetox.com. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Myers Detox podcast. And it's such a pleasure every week to bring you experts from around the world to help you, upgrade your health and improve your happiness, because you deserve to feel good. And so it's just really a pleasure every week to help you do that and find some of those pieces of the puzzle that you're missing to improve your health. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll talk to you guys next week.
The Myers Detox podcast is created and hosted by Wendy Myers. This podcast is for information purposes only. Statements and views expressed on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Wendy Myers and the producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.